Many of you know Brian from his books, from in-person and virtual presentations, from podcasts, and as a faculty member of Richard Rohr's Center for Action and Contemplation. In fact, those of you who get the center meditations daily know that last Thursday's meditation was Richard Rohr based it on a passage from an earlier book by Brian. The name of that book, or at least the first part of it, was Why Did Jesus, Moses, Buddha, and Muhammad Cross the Road? You have to like that. And then Richard said this: I've known faculty member Brian McLaren for many years and deeply admire his gift for making friends through his genuine curiosity, compassion, and unconditional presence to others. Last week I was reading Adam Grant's also new book, Think Again, and this sentence struck me. Grant said, "We favor the comfort of conviction over the discomfort of doubt, and we let our beliefs get brittle long before our bones." Brian's book challenges addiction to comfort as well as to brittle belief systems and offers us a deep faith expressed in love. Finally, in Faith After Doubt, Brian references the Christian mystic, some of us have heard of him, of Howard Thurman, who urges us to listen for, as he put it, the sound of the genuine. And I very much think that the sound of the genuine will be in strong evidence for all of us today as we listen to Brian. So the format will be Brian speaking for 25 or 30 minutes, then breakout sessions for about 20 minutes, and then return, and Brian will respond to that, and then wrap up. You really don't have to do anything. It'll all happen basically automatically. So please welcome Brian McLaren.
Thank you so much, Bob. What a delight to be with you. Thank you for inviting me. And what a delight to be with Maryknoll Associates. Just hearing people say hello to each other and seeing where you're from around the world, I feel I've entered into a fellowship and community of loving people, and I'm really, really honored to be with you. I'm going to be sharing my screen here, so let me just see if I can make this work correctly. And I think we've got it. Let me do one thing. There we go, that should work. And I also want to say I'm very glad to know that we're, actually I'm going to have to change that back. It just doesn't want to work this way. I'm especially happy to be talking about this theme of tending our souls, because I think as individuals and as faith communities and as nations, our souls have been through a lot, haven't they? Oh my goodness, we've endured an awful lot. Not only the coronavirus and all the lockdowns and many of us loss of loved ones, but then interruptions to our community life. And then on top of that, all the heartbreak that's going on globally. And for me in the US, you know, every week goes by with another shooting and just deep unresolved issues of white supremacy and rising tensions between political parties. And so I think first we all, you know, if you have scrolled through to just look at the other faces in the screen, you should look at these people and say, you're all heroes. You've survived a lot this last year, and congratulations for surviving. I grew up in a very, very conservative evangelical Protestant background. In fact, I think the word fundamentalist would fit the background that I grew up in. Of course, when you grow up something, it's just normal. You just think that's what everybody does and is. You don't know that you're experiencing something different from other people. I remember the first real tinge of doubt that hit my life was as a young boy. I loved science, and I loved, of course, I loved to read. And my mother would take me down the street to the library, and I'd come back every week with a big pile of books. And I especially like books about animals, books about trees and forests and rivers and reptiles and dinosaurs and birds. And I just loved anything I could get my hands on. And of course, when you are interested as a child in science, you pretty soon start learning about evolution. And my parents told me that they didn't believe in evolution. And my Sunday school teacher said, you have to make a choice. You can either believe in God or in evolution. And I remember, as a boy of 11 or 12 thinking, well, only a few more years and I can get out of this religion. But while I'm here, I guess I better not tell anybody what I really think. So that was my first feeling, that what my community, my faith community, expected me to say and what I really thought was true were out of sync. And of course, at different times, that tension between those two grew and reduced. And I ended up in my teenage years having some kind of powerful spiritual experiences that led me to stay Christian. And then eventually I became a pastor. I was a pastor for 24 years. And during my years in a local congregation just outside of Washington, D.C., I had a special place in my heart for doubters because I understood and I had questions and issues of my own. And through the years, I became especially interested in ways of understanding how doubt fits into the life of faith. And I became really interested in different theories of human development. And I was exposed to a whole range of theorists, from the great romantic poet William Blake to the Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard. My real entree into scholarship on stages of development was the American psychologist William Perry, and any number of theorists, some of them specifically focusing on how faith develops, others focusing on how, for example, racial identity develops, others focusing just on human development in general. And we've already mentioned my dear friend and colleague, Richard Rohr, who in many ways has proposed the simplest framework for understanding stages of development. He calls it the first half of life and the second half of life. And then he modified that a little bit and talked about three stages, what he calls order, disorder, and reorder. And what I began to see is certain patterns in these different stages. And actually, long before I met Richard, I developed a 4-stage schema that I'd like to share with you today. It's really, really simple. I promise you, in the next few minutes, you'll get it. You'll be able to remember it. It's very, very accessible. 4 stages, here they are. Stage 1, simplicity. That's where we all start. Stage 2, complexity. That makes sense. You would go from simple to complex. Stage 3, perplexity. That's where a lot of what you learned in simplicity and complexity begins to fall apart. And then 4th stage, harmony or solidarity. So those are the 4 stages: simplicity, complexity, perplexity, and harmony or solidarity. And I'd like to just give you a quick overview of them, offer a few comments, and then we'll have a lot of time to interact. So when we speak of raising a child, part of what we mean is raising the child to the level of simplicity. And when you think about a child, a child's new here. A child doesn't know what's safe, what's dangerous, what's edible, what's toxic, which people are safe and which people are dangerous to be around. And so what we have a natural interest for as children is dualistic answers to our questions: permissible, outlawed, right, wrong, true, false. And that dualism, that need to put things in binary categories, is really a matter of survival for children. As a result, it's, children are dependent on their parents and other authority figures. They come to them with questions, and any of you who've been parents know what it's like when your child is in that stage where there's questions coming, a dozen per minute. But this is what children need to do. And what they want from their authority figures is easy answers to their questions. Is this good or bad? If you say, well, it's complicated, a child, especially a young child, begins to tune you out, because the child really needs to know what's safe and what's dangerous. You maybe have heard of those studies that have been done where you take a group of children and you put them in a big wide field that has no fence around it. And the children, if it has no fence, tend to stay clustered in the center because they don't want to get too near the boundaries. And they aren't sure where the boundaries are. If you have a fence around that field, the children will explore the whole field. And if you think of it that way, children are looking to know what the boundaries are. And so they're looking for easy answers. And in stage one, everything is known or knowable. So I remember being in my teens, and I encountered my first theological debate. Now, for those of you who are Catholic, this one might not make any sense to you. You could think of a Catholic version of this debate. Maybe it would be, the pro-Pope Francis versus the anti-Pope Francis faction. But in my context, it was Calvinists versus Arminians. And if you don't know what those terms mean, just be grateful. But this argument was going on in my church. And I remember thinking, I'm just a kid and I don't know who's right, but give me a couple years and I'll have it all figured out. And it was this confidence. I just need more information because everything is known or knowable. Now, because in stage one, you're very oriented toward authority figures and you're very oriented toward our group being the norm and our group being the ones who have the right answers. You can tend to see the world through that dualistic lens in an us, them, in-group, out-group way. And in that way, life becomes a war. Life is a battle. And this is especially true among religious people who tend to say God is on our side and those other people are enemies of God. And when that comes in to children, it can be very, very deeply rooted. And you can grow up and spend your life trying to counteract that and still feel it because it was embedded in you by the authority figures you trusted from such a young age. And simplicity, again, is where I think nearly all of us start, and many of us stay there our whole lives. If you especially think about this in the past and in cultures today where people marry and have children young, let's say from birth to age 16 or 18, your parents and authority figures are drilling in the rules of simplicity on you. And then you become a parent and you spend the next 18 or 20 or 30 years, depending on how many children you have, drilling in the rules of simplicity on your children. And so you can see how a person could spend their whole lives in that stage of simplicity. And to complicate matters a little bit, I think that many of our religious communities require stage one to be considered a good person. And I'm going to guess whether you're Catholic, Protestant, if you're Jewish, Muslim, Sikh, Buddhist, whatever, there are congregations, synagogues, temples, mosques, where everyone is expected to be in stage one. And we just don't go beyond there. We talk about what's right and what's wrong, who's in and who's out, what's orthodox and heretical, and we just don't mess with anything much beyond that. So in simplicity, we find meaning in our in-group belonging and being among the group of people who are right and correct and good. And a lot of people stay there their whole lives, but some people begin to have problems. Very often it happens at puberty, when maybe there are very strict rules about sexuality and an adolescent says, I don't agree with these rules. And so now they're challenging the authority figures of their community and they want to figure out some things on their own. Or it might happen where a child grows up, for example, as I did, in a Christian family that saw people of other religions as they're outsiders. You know, you could be influenced in a bad way by them. And so there's this sense of skepticism that you're taught within a religious community. And then you meet people in school, or especially when you go to university, who might be from different parts of the world and different religions and different cultures. And you find out these are wonderful people. My people told me these were bad people. They're wonderful. And so now the simplicity categories begin to crumble. And you say they just don't fit anymore. They just don't work. Something else that happens remember, in that in-group loyalty, we on the inside are good. Well, what happens when you start encountering people on the inside who treat you badly? And so maybe there would be abuse or some bad behavior, a scandal among a religious leader in our community. And suddenly our categories of simplicity are shaken up and the world becomes more complex. And what I sense, and a lot of the theorists talk about this in various ways, happens is we make a shift from everything being a question of dualistic absolutes to being a question of pragmatic coping strategies. You realize, oh, this group of Catholics behaves this way, this group of Catholics behaves this way. When you're around Jesuits, they're like this. When you're around Franciscans, they're like this. Or when you're around Baptists, they're like this. And when you're around Methodists, they're like, or when you're around Jews, and Orthodox Jews behave differently than Reconstructionist Jews. And you start realizing there are a lot of different games out here. There are a lot of different sets of rules here. And I have to learn to navigate my way dealing with all of this complexity. And in order to do that, you have to become increasingly independent. You look for authority figures now who don't give you easy answers, but they give you the steps to success and the techniques and know-how to survive in this complex world. And so you look for authority figures who are more like coaches. I remember so clearly, I was a teenager. I mentioned earlier, I had some very deeply life-changing spiritual experiences. And there was this fellow 5 or 6 years older than me, 7 years older than me, who became kind of a mentor to me. And I went to him with this question. And I don't even remember what the question was, but I remember he said, you know, Brian, there are 5 different ways that Christians look at that question. And now I'm ready for him to tell me which is right and which is wrong. And he didn't. He said, and he explained each of the 5 views as if he believed each of them. And so finally I said, well, which one do you believe? And he said, well, that's not really that important. You need to make up your own mind. And I'll just tell you, at that moment, I thought, I've never had anybody give me the freedom to make up my own mind on a matter of religion before. And he became a coach, exactly what I was looking for as I was edging my way into stage 2. And so now there's this confidence. We can make things happen. We can fix things in stage 2. All is done or doable. And now you just have to learn the rules of the game. And in stage 2, we find our meaning based on individual achievement and the achievement of our group. And so now we move from being right to being effective. And we want to be independent and able to function and learn on our own. And so many, many people now have moved into stage 2. I think higher education often, not always, but often nudges people into stage 2. And I think cross-cultural travel very often takes people into stage 2. I also think if you're a religious or racial or ethnic minority in a dominant culture, in a sense, your life is never simple. And you probably grow up coming into stage 2 pretty quickly. Again, many people stay there for their whole lives. But I think that more and more people at younger and younger ages are thrust out of stage 2 into perplexity. And what happens in perplexity is we begin to look back on everything that our authority figures told us in stages 1 and stage 2, and we start saying some of what I was taught seemed really good at the time, but now I think it was harmful. I think there were problems all running through what I was taught. And you enter into a period of critique of your own inheritance. What you received from authority figures now, you feel not only permission to challenge, but almost a moral responsibility to challenge it. For example, in complexity, you want to learn more information. You like gathering data. So many people start learning about church history, and they find out horrible things that have been done in the name of Jesus Christ and in the name of the church. And they just think, why didn't anybody tell me this? What other secrets are they keeping from me? And so in perplexity, you develop a kind of critical thinking and skepticism where you now become, to some degree, alienated from your own tradition, or at least highly critical of it. You go from being dependent in stage one to independent in stage two to being, to a degree, counter-dependent in stage three, because your very sense of identity now is in a complex relationship with your heritage. Um, and very often, the people you look to as authority figures might be scientists because you feel they're objective. Of course, if you're a scientist, you might also know that they're not always so objective. And you might look toward rebels and iconoclasts who challenge the status quo. You may look toward mystics and contemplatives in this stage if you're fortunate enough to have been introduced to them. But now your life is based around questions and suspicion, and you begin to deconstruct, and you become aware that everyone with a viewpoint really just has a view from a certain point. And now you begin to protest the arrogance of people who think they can tell everybody else what to think and how to think. Now, I'll tell you, there are millions and millions, and I'll just speak as a Christian, millions of Christians, when they enter into perplexity, they find no safety in the church. They go to their religious leaders with their questions, and they're just told, here's what you have to believe, and if you don't, you're out. And as a result, many people leave the faith. At the beginning of the book, I mentioned that 65 million American adults who grew up in church no longer attend. And that number grows by several million every year. And just this week, you may have heard the new data that came out that for the first time, less than half of Americans claim to be a member of a religious community. And so what's happening is a lot of more people are reaching stage three, and they're not finding much help in their faith community. Let me just say, for all of our, the Catholic participants, any denomination that has higher education usually does a better job of helping people in stage three. At least there often are people at the university level who are used to young adults with questions and find ways to help those young people to see stage three as a process of growth for their faith. But many people, and those of us who are fortunate enough to be in much more welcoming and honest spaces, might find it hard to believe how many people are suffering. And it's happening in the Christian faith. But I'll tell you, there are similar struggles in Islam and in Judaism and in every different tradition. So perplexity, we find meaning in an in-group critique and in seeking honesty and justice and being willing to challenge our inherited communities in the name of honesty and justice. Many people are unaware that there's any option for them inside their faith beyond stage three. They've never seen it, they've never been exposed to it. But more and more people are finding, it might be through a retreat center where there are spiritual directors. And I know, I'll just tell you, when I was a Protestant minister, many of my Protestant minister friends would sneak out at night for a secret liaison at a Catholic retreat center with a nun or a brother or a monk who would serve as their spiritual director. And it was the first time in their life they ever could sit with someone who wasn't going to judge them, but who would listen, because spiritual directors are trained to listen to people and to discern God active in a person's life, even in the middle of their difficulties and doubts. And so very often the people who find a way through perplexity, it's because they find an individual, a mentor, a community, a spiritual director, or maybe they stumble onto an author. And when they read that author, they say, this person is at a place beyond anything I've ever experienced. Maybe they can help me. And they find their way into stage four that I call harmony or solidarity, where we develop a non-dual way of seeing the world. We keep the dualism we learned as children, we don't reject. we just embrace it in something larger. We integrate the strengths of stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, now in a larger integration. We understand our interdependence. We are, if we're looking for authority figures now, we're looking for those people who we sense they know something we don't. They're beyond us in some way. They have capacities we don't have. And we very often seek a kind of contemplative, we engage with the contemplative tradition, because in many ways, this is the tradition in the Christian faith that has inhabited this non-dual space. We begin to have maybe even experiences where we sense and feel our connectedness, or intellectually we begin to see it and feel it. And now we learn to live with the reality that some things are knowable to a degree and many things are unknowable. And I think of a Protestant pastor I know who went through deep, deep doubt during the time he was a pastor, and at some points felt that he was an atheist and would have to leave ministry. And I remember when he had a kind of breakthrough and he said, "I'm not sure of a lot, Brian." He said, "But now I'm at least sure that life is a gift and love is the point." And so this experience of solidarity becomes a kind of breakthrough for many people. I should say that when people say, why does stage 1 simplicity exercise so much power, especially in religious communities? I think it's because everybody is born as an infant. And in a sense, stage 1 is always busy helping a new generation of babies be brought up to stage 1. And I recommend that instead of thinking of these as linear stages, you think of them as rings on a tree. So stage 1 emerges, and then stage 2 embraces it in something larger. Stage 3 embraces it in something larger. And I think if you get to stage 4 and you begin to live there and it becomes habitual, it becomes your new simplicity. And if you wait long enough, you'll be confronted with new complexities and new perplexity. And I think the process continues. A couple of final comments. I think that in many faith communities, there are gatekeepers of the stage. So there are gatekeepers who control access to the space. And if you don't conform, they have the power first to reject you and not let you in, or once you're in, they have the power to punish you and even exclude you. And with, obviously, this language is unimportant, whether you talk about these 4 stages or whatever. But I think what often happens is the gatekeepers have an instinct for what stage 1 feels like. And anything that doesn't feel like stage 1, they find a way to kick that person out. Or maybe their space is more of a stage 2 space, and they find a way to edge the people out or threaten them so that the people pretend to stay at that stage, even though inside they aren't really there. People in the book, I have quite a few places where I discuss the difference between faith and beliefs. It's a big problem in the English language because we tend to use these words interchangeably. So let me offer you an analogy. I'd like to propose to you that faith is like the scientific method. Faith is a way of approaching the unknown with openness and curiosity. Faith is like the scientific method. Beliefs are like facts that the scientific method produces. But here's an issue for religious people. The scientific method, scientists are more committed to their method than to their facts. That's why if new evidence comes up that challenges a previously held fact, then in the name of the method, they will challenge the fact. And one of our problems in the Christian faith is that we paint ourselves into a corner with our beliefs. And in that way, stage 1 articulations of beliefs often dominate. And in a sense, would be like saying to scientists, okay, it's 2021, no new facts after today. You have to stick with today's facts. You can continue to do research, but nothing will be allowed that contradicts any of our existing facts. And this is a struggle in many, many religious communities. And I wish I had a simple solution, but I don't. I think it's part of why conversations like this are important. And so I'm hoping that this 4-stage model could be helpful for you in tending the soul of individuals, beginning with your own, helping you understand maybe where you are and why you're struggling, and maybe places where you're out of sync with certain communities or groups of people. And then I think maybe it could also help us to tend the soul of institutions, to understand that institutions tend to have a center of gravity in one of these stages. And they might be able to stretch a little bit this way or a little bit this way. But maybe it then helps us to imagine what I think we really need to imagine, which is, could there be 4-stage faith communities? In other words, communities that help people at each of the 4 stages, but that are led by stage 4 leaders who will always be inviting people to further growth. Maybe the last thing I'll say is that I think when people move into stage 4, because now they've experienced their faith go through a number of transitions, they develop an outlook on life that is fundamentally different than people in stage 1. And here's the way I could say it. They, in a sense, embrace a cosmology of process, meaning they understand that they sincerely believed in God. They sincerely believed in Jesus. They sincerely believed in the church. They sincerely believed in the scriptures. They sincerely believed in the Holy Spirit in stage 1. But my goodness, by the time they got to stage 2, their belief changed. And by the time they got to stage 3, it changed more. And where they are now, it's changed more. And so instead of seeing things as getting them right and fixed forever, everything opens up into progress. And so those are some comments to help us get started. And let me first thank you for your attention. I hope that will be useful as you're thinking through these questions, this issue of tending our souls in light of faith and doubt. And we're going to have some time now for discussion in groups. And Bob, I think you need to unmute.
Thanks so much, Brian. You know, they say sometimes the movie is better than the book and the book is better than the movie. In this case, I'm not sure, but it was really good to have Brian, for many of us that have read the book and really seen it as a pivotal work, to see even more so why. So we're going to break into breakout sessions now. I think most of you have done that. If not, it'll automatically happen. There'll be some questions, 4 questions put into the chat that in your respective groups you can take a look at. At the end, if one in the group could be kind of a monitor and just in the chat put down some words that reflect your response to one of those questions, especially perhaps the last one, or to something else that came up for you. And then in about 20 minutes, you'll probably get a little message saying it's about to close, and then we'll come back to the plenary with Brian for our responses. So we're going to move into breakout groups now, and thanks so much. Okay, I think we're all back now, and what we're going to do, if I can, if this works out, is people are going to send me through WhatsApp because of so much happening here, and I'll then ask them to ask the question to Brian, if that works out.
You know, we also have people putting questions in the chat.
Yes, if you can see, I mean, while I'm waiting, if you can want to respond to one.
Sure, sure.
Okay.
So there's a question from group 1. What can we do to make sure we are kingdom builders on earth? What a great question. And you know, I'm certainly have so much more to learn about the Maryknoll community, but it seems to me you all are doing such a beautiful, have such a beautiful charism and track record in this already. One of the things I would say is that if we can help people, the goal isn't to rush people through these 4 stages as fast as possible, but the goal is to help them learn the lessons of each stage. And then when they're ready, to help them move on. I think we're at a place in the world right now where we need a critical mass of people to get through stage 3 to stage 4. And that's one of the reasons why I have felt a special concern for the people who are in stage 3. It is such an important stage, and it's the stage where people often begin to really care about global issues. And I know one of Maryknoll's key values is to be concerned about the whole world. And sensitivities grow around justice and compassion, in especially deep ways in stage 3. So I think one of the important roles we can play first is to be able to accept people where they are and to be able to help them move to the next stage. And I think we especially have to find ways to invite people to help people who are in stage 2 to move into stage 3, stage 3 to move into stage 4. And what that very often involves is just having some clarity about what stage 4 looks like. In the book, I talk about a little phrase. It's in the Epistle to Galatians in the New Testament. So interesting that this is, I was a preacher, for many, many years. And you know how there are certain verses that are very famous and get quoted a lot. And this one doesn't get quoted very much. And I suppose you'll see why when I quote it, the first part of it. But in Galatians 5, it says, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision counts for anything. Well, you can see people don't like to quote those kind of verses too much, but it's the next phrase that's critical. And remember, for the people to whom Paul was writing, circumcision and uncircumcision, that was a dualism that was supremely important because it was the marker of insiders and outsiders. It might be like a Christian saying, baptism or no baptism, it's not important. What's important is faith expressing itself in love. And this idea that everything really is about love, inviting people into that kind of community, it seems to me is really a critical thing that we can do. Maybe I'll just say one other thing about that. Earlier today, I was on another webinar at an online conference, and I was on with a friend of mine, a dear friend named Valerie Kaur, and she wrote a book called See No Stranger. And here Valerie is from a Sikh tradition, and she, when she describes the vision and the goal to which she is working, it's identical to what we as Christians are talking about when we talk about faith expressing itself in love. Maybe not identical, but so deep, in such deep resonance. So I think that's one of the things that we can do in this process. I have a couple more questions that have shown up on the chat, unless you want to raise one.
Let me try, if this could be fine doing it that way, but Celine, do you have a question that you took out?
Yeah, it's one of the ones that came from the chat as well. And we just said that, in our group, we found ourselves mostly in stage 3, but we're wondering how to move to stage 4. People are almost afraid of it. And, if you don't have a spiritual director, which is what you were referring to, what tools or what advice do you have as people are sort of walking this journey?
Yes. Well, Celine, it makes me so happy to hear people asking that question. And I'm really happy. I wonder, Celine, if you could just expand on one thing. When you said people are almost a little afraid, I think that's significant. Could you talk about that?
Well, because in our group, we were saying that there's, and I have to say also that there was a member of our group, which was wonderful because she didn't know what Marino was. And she found out about this by following like your Facebook page.
Yes.
Okay. So that was it was even better, So we had a more diverse discussion. And she was saying, and we all agree, we moved from stage 1 to stage 2, stage 3, and we're feeling a little bit alienated. We do want to move to stage 4, but we're kind of afraid. And there's some security in stage 1 and stage 2 that you're sort of afraid to let go of, but you need to embrace the non-dualism. But what are you going to hold on to when times are tough?
Yes. So let me just say, if there's one place where stage 3 people tend to feel at home, it's graduate school. Because when you think about it, in graduate school, you read primary sources and you're exposed to, in The Wizard of Oz, what's behind the curtain. And you find out that all the great theorists argue with each other and disagree with each other. And you start to see, more of what goes on behind the scenes. And, but one of the downsides of that is when you're in an academic community whose entire sort of the modus operandi, the way of operating is through critique and skepticism,
Yeah.
the idea of making a commitment and the idea of not just being an observer, but being a participant again,
Yeah.
it's like a risk.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a risk. And I think that's part of both the appeal and the challenge of stage 4.
Yeah.
It's the decision, I can't just be an observer seeing the problems. I have to break through. I'll just share a quick story about this. I was in graduate school. I was a lit major, and I was in a literary criticism class, and we were studying all of these different ways to approach a piece of literature. So there's something called Marxist analysis, where you read a novel looking for class conflict. And there's Freudian analysis, where you read a novel looking for Oedipus complexes and, all that sort of thing. And all these different schools of literary criticism. And then I remember it dawned on me in that class, I realized the Marxist explains everybody's behavior in terms of class conflict except his own. Because if you say, what is your interest? And, how is your giving this lecture working out your own class conflict? Or the Freudian, is explaining everybody's behavior, but when he's giving the lecture, it's all just pure theory, right? But then you realize, no. And when you take all of these tools that you've used to critique others and you turn them on yourself, then you feel you have no place to stand. And who am I? What am I doing? And I think there's almost a sense that you reduce yourself to nothing and you say, I want to be a human being. And what kind of human being do I want to be? And I think when we ask that question, there's a saying in Buddhism that when the student is ready, the teacher will come. And I think we may have been surrounded by teachers who could help us all along, but we weren't ready for them. And I think when we get to that place, I want to learn how to live. I think we ask that question. And if we have the faith to turn that question into a prayer, I think that's when we'll start to be able to find the teachers that are available.
Thank you. Turning the faith into a prayer. That's a beautiful way of expressing it.
Thanks, Brian. I don't know if our high-tech system is working. If you see another question, can you maybe handle it?
Yeah. There's quite a few. Okay. Can one be in more than one stage at the same time from group 11? Yes. In fact, I think I could describe my own life in this way. Grew up in stage 1, moved into stage 2. Boy, I loved stage 2. And when I was going into stage 3, I would easily revert back into stage 2 because I was just so comfortable there. But so I would try to keep stage 3 at bay, but it would come back. So I think we sort of can inhabit a couple of stages. And in fact, sometimes I think, a lot of people drop out of church, and when they go back, they feel like, oh, this is familiar. I know how to work in this setting again. And so I think we can be fluid between stages, yes, in relation to that question. Let's see. Another question, if you've discerned and find yourself in stage 4, is there a stage 5? And so what I would say is, if you stay in stage 2 long enough, let's just take that phrase I used before. The only thing that matters is faith expressing itself in love. And of course, as soon as you hear that, if you know the New Testament, St. Paul also said, without love, you're nothing. So you say, okay, this is all about love. You can see how that becomes your new simplicity. And for a while, you feel a euphoria. I finally have a simplicity I can live with again. And it's just this beautiful experience. But then you find out the complexities of figuring out how to be a loving person are really a big challenge. I'll just give you an example. I was speaking at a conference, and the theme of the conference was revolutionary love. And one of the speakers was an African-American woman and she was a seminary professor. And so she got up to give her lecture, and her first statement was, I'm good with the revolutionary part. I'm not so good with the love part. And then she said, and let me explain why. I tend to see white people always use the word love when they want Black people to get back under their control. Oh, now you're working with love, which feels like a big breakthrough, but now you face a new complexity, how even the word love can be used as a tool of oppression. And then, that's why I think they tend to repeat themselves, and that stage 4, in a sense, becomes the new simplicity. In fact, a number of theorists, like the great French philosopher Paul Ricoeur, talked about a first naivete and then a second naivete. And yeah, so I think there are a lot of similarities there. Let's see, another question. How do we make friends from different stages? What a really interesting question. Let me first say, and that was from, let's see, that was from group 2. I was on a plane once, and I was on the, in the middle seat. And I started talking to the woman on my right, and she revealed herself to be a fundamentalist Christian, really strict, Protestant, really zealous. And she was trying to evangelize me. And when she found out that I was a pastor, she was happy, although I think she probably wondered if I was of the same brand of Christian that she was. I then turned and started talking to the guy on my left, and he was an Orthodox Jew. He was from a sect of hyper-Orthodox Jews. And he had, he had a hairstyle from his religious community, and he was dressed in 19th century dress, which was part of their community. So he and I started talking. Then the woman on my right at the window seat heard me talking to this fellow, and then she leaned over and introduced herself. And for the rest of the flight, I felt that I was sort of sitting back watching two people from completely different worlds have a chance to get to know each other and ask each other questions. And there was this beautiful sense that that one was coming from a stage 1 Jewish community and one was coming from a stage 1 Christian community, and they were comparing notes, and it was really, really interesting. Things don't always go that smoothly, but that was a beautiful experience. But sometimes I think a way to say it is, if you're in a stage, if your tree, you've already been through that ring and you recognize it, then in a sense, what you can do is learn how to speak in the terms of your conversation partner. And you can judiciously not blow things up and find common ground. It's harder to do that with someone who is a stage or two beyond you. And very often the best thing to do in that situation is to just start asking questions and to be vulnerable. Here's how I see things. I'd love to know how you see them. In fact, if I could offer one little phrase that you could stick in the front of every question that could really, really help, here's the phrase: I'm curious. I'm really curious. Because here's the problem, when, especially in the world of religion, when people get asked questions about their religion, very often it's a little bit like politics. They're ready for a gotcha question. And it's a very different thing to answer a question when you're worried that somebody's about to pounce on you or disagree with you, as compared to when a person has conveyed to you genuine curiosity about how they see things. Quick example of this. I tell the story in that book, actually, Why Did Jesus, Moses, the Buddha, and Muhammad Cross the Road? After September 11th, I became friends with an imam, the leader of a mosque not far from where my church was. And I had had several Muslim friends, but he was my first friend who was an imam. And I think I was his first friend who wasn't just sort of a professional associate. We really grew to love one another. We started having lunch together once a month. And one day, his name was Shamshad. I said, Shamshad, what do you love most about being a Muslim? And that was the question that just opened his heart, and he just poured out his heart. And then, of course, he turned and asked that question to me. But when we show genuine curiosity, I think, for a person, how do things look from where you are? I think that's one way for us to build bridges across across different stages. So that's, uh, I'm going to go, and if other people have questions they want to put in the chat, feel free. Group 14 asks, how do you find a coach mentor to help you move to the next stage? And I wish I had an easy answer for that. Just the fact that a person that you're asking that question, I think is really, really important. And I think, as I said earlier, once you've asked the question, I think you'll start noticing people. But I'll just tell you, when I was a stage 2 pastor and I was having stage 3 questions, I didn't have a single friend in my circle of friends, so I felt safe to ask them to. They all would have tried to fix me. They all would have been worried about me. I didn't know a single person. And then I came across a book by a professor at a seminary, and I felt like this guy gets the questions I'm asking. So I called the seminary, found the secretary of that office, and said, I'm hoping to make an appointment with Dr. So-and-so. She didn't ask where I was from. She didn't ask anything, but we made an appointment. And so I drove, what she didn't know and what the professor didn't know is I drove 4.5 hours one way to get that meeting with him. And I met him for lunch, and then I left. And it was worth my 9 hours in the car because I so much needed to find somebody who would be safe to talk to. These days with the internet, I think very often people can find groups. There are ways that people are finding each other to create those safe places. But I know for many people in many settings, they don't know anyone. In fact, I think I'll tell you this. Obviously, I'm not going to violate any confidences here. But a few years ago, well, probably 8 or 9 years ago now, I got an email. You know, as I told you, I'm Protestant. I never got an email with a Vatican return address on it before, or a Vatican email address on it before. And so it was someone who worked at the Vatican, and he asked if I'd be willing to have a phone call with them. So you can imagine what I'm feeling. I feel a little bit like the kid who got called to the principal's office, you know, and I didn't know who this person was. And but I was a little worried, and here's why. I wrote a book called A New Kind of Christianity. In English, it was called A New Kind of Christianity. And the subtitle was 10 Questions That Are Transforming the Faith. That book got translated into Italian. And the title that they gave it in Italian, you know, when you're an author, you don't even know these things are happening. The title in Italian was 10 Questions the Church is Afraid to Ask. So my thought is, that I'm getting a call from the Vatican by somebody who's mad at me about the Italian title of the book. So we have a phone call, and he says, first, I want to tell you, you're absolutely right in your book. He said, these are 10 questions that the church is afraid to ask. And in fact, I'm using your book in a few of my classes that I teach at some of the pontifical universities in Rome. He said, but the reason I'm calling is, he said, because of where I work, it's not always easy for me to speak freely about my own questions. And I wondered if I could enter into private forum with you. In other words, I wonder if I could enter into some open conversations with you. And I must tell you how honored I felt to be sought out in this way. But I also realized that very often, you know, people who have big positions in religious organizations, we're all human beings, and we all need people to talk to about our questions and our struggles. And I remember he had a very specific question. In theological terms, the sort of theological debate that's going on is a debate about the agency of God. It's a question about how God works in the world. And here was a brilliant theologian working at the Vatican, but he needed a conversation partner who he could be completely frank with about his questions and what was unsatisfying to him in any of the traditional answers he'd been given. And so that's why I would say, you know, when we find ourselves in those places, sometimes it takes some work to go find a safe conversation partner. And if you get started and it's not going well, it's very often best to just find it, you know, look for someone who's ready, because sometimes they're just not ready for for you. Let me go to the,
Just,
yes.
this is so meaningful, so worthwhile. I think we're a little past, but this is great if you could take maybe one more question. I mean, someone said it was a question from Ginny or Celine had one, but if you see one, that's okay. And then we'll wrap up.
Well, let me just read one comment. Indigenous peoples face this four-stage struggle very quickly globally because of pressure from the dominant culture or cultures. And I think that is such an insightful comment.
Yeah.
And it's just a reminder to all of us who are part of a majority culture or a majority religion to realize that through no bad intention of ourselves or of the majority group, although there often is bad intention, but even with no bad intention, just the existence of dominant groups and other groups creates situations of great stress and even trauma for people. And I think that's one of the things that you don't get until you've moved into stage 3. Because one way to say it, just to sum, maybe as a final statement, is stage 1 in some ways is faith before doubt. Stage 2 is faith managing doubt. Stage 3 is faith in doubt. And stage 4 is faith after and with doubt, because doubt never goes away. It becomes the companion that you learn is not an enemy to your faith, but actually is an integral part of being a human being. So maybe that's a good place to stop.
Wow.
Thank you so much for the wonderful questions, everyone.
Thank you so much, Brian. Really, I think it's pivotal, like you mentioned in the beginning, for so many of us. And those sounds of the genuine really were clear to us. I just want to thank you for everyone that came, especially thank the lay missioners for letting us use the Zoom platform, and in particular, Chris Keaveney for doing all this tech work. And I just want to end with a very brief reflection. And this is actually taken from the Beatitudes that you reworded, Brian. I've just chose 5 of them. So these are the Beatitudes reworded by Brian. Blessed are the curious, for their curiosity honors reality. Blessed are the wonderers, for they shall find what is wonderful. Blessed are the perplexed, for they have reached the frontiers of contemplation. Blessed are the doubters, for they shall see through false gods. And lastly, blessed are the lovers, for they shall see God everywhere. Thanks, everyone. Thanks again, Brian. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's all.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you. That
you
was
so
tough.
much.
Thank you,
That was really
guys.
tough.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Great,
Thank
great,
you.
great, great, great.
Very.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Bob.
thank
That
you,
was
Bob.
one really good. Really
Thank
Go
good.
have the beer. Go have the beer now, Bob.
What's that?
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Bob.
I'm hearing voices all over.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Many blessings to all.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Hey, Celine. Good to see you, Celine. Yeah,
Yeah, so good to see so many of you.
wonderful.
Everyone, thank you.
Okay.